Hi, everyone. Welcome. If you're one of my students, please sign in to the Q&A with your question for Allison Stewart, who's come to visit today. We will be live streaming this today as well, so hopefully we'll have some viewers live on Facebook. I'm really pleased to present Allison Stewart today. Allison Stewart grew up in Houston, Texas, and currently lives in Los Angeles, California. She received her MFA in photography from California State University, Long Beach, and her BFA in painting with a minor in art history from the University of Houston. Allison travels the United States, exploring the construction of American identity through its relics, rituals, and mythologies. Her work has been published and exhibited internationally, including Cortona on the Move, the Aperture Foundation, the Wright Museum, the New Mexico History Museum, the Griffin Museum of Photography, the New Republic, Die Zeit, Wired, Mother Jones, and Vogue Italia. Her work has been honored by the Magenta Foundation, IPA, the Texas Photographic Society, and the Houston Center for Photography. Her work is included in the Rubel Family Collection, the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the New Mexico History Museum, Palace of the Governor's Photo Archive, the University of Wisconsin Alumni Association, and private collection. Allison is also a founding member of the Association of Historic Curators and a absolutely wonderful and outstanding secondary school teacher. I want to thank her for being here today. Thank you so much. And thank you to Grand Central Arts Center and Cal State Fullerton College of the Arts for sponsoring our Socially Engaged and Teaching Artists series today. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you. Thank you, Mariana, for putting this together, and to Cal State Fullerton for making it happen. It's exciting to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. Okay. So I'm an artist and an educator. I teach photography and art history at Hoover High School in Glendale, California. And I'm here today in my studio in downtown Los Angeles, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Tongva people. Like Mariana said, for the last decade, I guess, my artwork has focused on American identity and how our obsession with guns and war has affected American culture, and how we interpret and represent the archetype of the hero. I'm going to start with a body of work that this is my thesis when I was at Cal State Long Beach for my MFA. I finished in 2011. And this project focuses on the role of the hero archetype in American culture. And I'm looking specifically at the soldier as in the way that it's represented, and how when I saw that these representations of soldiers, I was reminded of the way that Christ has been represented. And so looking at the American soldier as a sacred, secular Christ figure. Here we have the Michelangelo's Pieta on the left, and then on the right, we have the painting, very famous painting of the death of General Wolfe, where we see a general in the Pieta position. And this kind of Pieta position has been used not just in fine art, but also in photography. This is an image on the left from following the bombing of Hiroshima, and showing the after effects and how the bombing affected Hiroshima for many years. And the image on the right came from the 80s, and it was originally a black and white photograph that was then colorized and used by Benetton as an ad, and it's of an AIDS patient, and the similarities between the images of Christ, and you can see. So I know a lot of you guys are teaching, are going to school full time, and you're also probably working. I worked the entire time that I was in my grad program. It was a lot to juggle. So, I understand what you're going through. It's definitely very hard, but you can do it. It just takes a lot of time management and forgiving yourself a lot when you feel like you're not doing enough. being a public school teacher is really an honor, and it's a great responsibility as well. And I'm glad that I held on to my job. I was, a lot of people were telling me, no, you need to stop teaching. You need to, do grad school full time, and you really need to focus. And I was like, okay, well, who's going to pay my bills? Who's going to pay my insurance? How is this going to happen? So I'm glad that I continued through, and I enjoy being at the school where I am, and I'm in my 19th year there, and it's exciting. I like it. So here is another image. So this was during this project called The Fallen. I'm photographing this kind of the ultimate hero, our in the beautiful death. A lot of people think that we're not censored in America, that we can pretty much Google anything that we want to. And during my thesis, I found that that is absolutely not true. So during this project, while I was photographing, making these photographs, I was Googling every day, 3 times a day, in the morning when I'd wake up, and then at about lunchtime, and then in the evening, dead American soldier, and seeing what I would get as far as Google images. And what I always got was the same kind of 2 or 3 images of this kind of beautiful death pose, or it was an image from far away, or it was a pieta kind of image where one soldier is holding on to another soldier and kind of, pulling them through and kind of creating that pieta composition. And so this kind of beautiful death image that gets used as propaganda for to kind of perpetuate this mythic war that we have created, where everybody is a hero, and nothing bad happens, and if it does, it's for a righteous cause. So also during this time, these were done during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And so being a teacher at a public high school, it was an interesting time. We had more armed service recruiters on campus during that time than we had college recruiters. And so every day we would have a recruiter kind of standing around outside at lunch and waiting for the boys. And I could see them. They were targeting students of color. They were targeting students that were obviously low income. And then when people were not signing up anymore because people weren't coming home, or they were, we were getting mired into these wars, then the recruiters were female. So they started sending female recruiters who would sit out on the lunch tables, and then the boys would come over, and then they would, it was a huge thing. It was just amazing to me. All the students in this project were my students, and they had just turned 18. And they had just signed their selective service that they do at 18 years old. And so I'm having them pose as the beautiful dead, one for each war that the United States has been involved in. And this is my Pieta piece from that project. The project that I did after that is called American Anthem. And my previous project kind of led into this. And so in this project, I'm photographing war reenactments and the war reenactors. I was, renting the costumes and buying, not the costumes, but the uniforms for the last project. And I started to get to know some of these people that were at these, at the Army surplus stores, and some of them were reenactors, and I'd tell them about my project. They're like, why don't you just go photograph reenactors? And I was like, oh, how many reenactments are there in California? I was like, there's not reenactments in California. I was shocked to find out how many Civil War reenactments there are in California, including this one that took place in Moore Park and was a yearly thing. I don't think that they're doing it anymore. A lot of these reenactments stopped after Charlottesville in 2017. And So in this project, I'm looking at the way that the images are being used to perpetuate the lost cause narrative and to create and teach revisionist history. Because the people that participate in these reenactments consider themselves living history educators. But what history is it exactly that they are teaching? They, when I started going to these, when I went to my first one, I was like completely like, I grew up in the South, and I grew up going to gun shows and air shows and all kinds of things, but I don't think I'd ever been to a war reenactment that I remember, but I do remember seeing reenactors at events. But I was really blown away. And one of the things that really struck me was how they are reenacting these images from that we know well from our high school history books, from Alexander Gardner and the Matthew Brady Studios and Timothy O'Sullivan. And so the reenactors look at these images, and I included this quote here, which is the opening, the lead-in to Alexander's book, Sketchbook of the Civil War, which he created as an anti-war propaganda. So they are using anti-war propaganda. They're copying the images and creating these tableaux vivants as performances for people. So I'm sitting in the stands as I'm taking these pictures. So I'm getting the same, there's a very specific stage that they're working with. And so as you can see, they're reenacting the very famous Harvest of Death here, including with having the horse in the right spot and this kind of sloping background. And so I was really like amazed that I kept seeing these Gardner images and Brady images over and over again that they would just kind of pop into. And I was kind of horrified by it, because they were using these to promote war rather than to promote peace. And so like here with the death, you know, and so we have the actual death on the left, and then the performed beautiful death on the right. I was really fascinated by the kind of absurd pageantry of this, and also that it's an incredibly expensive hobby, you know. And I was like, what is going on? Why are these people spending their weekends, spending lots of money to performatively die for their country again and again? So when I was done with my MFA, that was right at the point when the sesquicentennial of the Civil War was starting. So it was the 150th, and there were big reenactments all throughout that during the sesquicentennial. Here's one from Gettysburg. So the reenactment of Gettysburg, the 150th, was huge. There were something like about 80,000 reenactors that were participating. It was a huge event. It's gotten, again, like I said, it's gotten a lot smaller over the years. I also was, you know, like I said, it's a family hobby. And so the families all take part. A lot of the reenactors have these alter egos, or they have these characters that they are playing throughout, and they're performing as these characters, and they stay in character for the entire weekend. So when I go around and I talk to these women, I'm not talking to a woman that's living in, you know, 2015 or 2014 at this time. I'm talking to a woman who is pretending to be living in 1863, or 61 through 64. And so it was very bizarre to me. So it was difficult to have any deep conversations with them, because everything is really a performance. But I was fascinated in the way that they would perform for the camera and for me, and the way that this family hobby that they participate in. That project, kind of the Sacred Ground project that I've been working on, which is kind of like a large project that's kind of taken over and taken a lot of different forms. It started around this time, and it started as one of those projects where I was taking pictures and I was like, I don't know why I'm taking a picture of this. For some reason, I feel the need to, and I'll kind of see what happens later. You know, sometimes you make work and you know exactly what it is that you are doing and what you want to get. And sometimes you're just kind of following the project, and the project is kind of leading you until you get to a point where you have some sort of epiphany and it all starts to come together. And so these are photographs of monuments. So talking about the you know, how are heroes' stories told through memorial and through monumentation, and who do we memorialize in America? What is the balance there? And I think that we all know that the balance is heavily shifted towards white military men. We have more than, and particularly Confederacy, which is where this kind of ended up going. But we have very few monuments to women, to actual women. We often have monuments to the idea of womanhood. This is a monument that is on a reservation in Arizona. And this is the site of a Japanese internment camp. And this monument was built by the families that were interned. And they built this for their sons who had joined the US Armed Forces and fought in World War II against the Japanese while their families were being interned. So they built this with kind of scrap material, and it's still standing. And the Gila River Indian community are the caretakers of this monument. And you cannot, it's not open to the public. You cannot access it. I'm the only person who has ever taken not the only person to have ever photographed it, but the only person who isn't tightly involved, a family member or community member that has photographed it. It's never been photographed otherwise. So I'm interested in how not only how we memorialize people, but and our heroes, but also how we as visitors and how we interact with them and how it's used to teach. You know, obviously, I'm very interested in history. I'm interested in the truth in history. And I'm also interested in the myths that often get taught. And so this is at, one of those old homes. This is a home at Appomattox where the Civil War ended. And so this is while we were on a tour. This is a Pioneer Woman Memorial. So like I said, very rarely are monuments to women, to actual women who have lived. They're usually monuments to the idea of womanhood. And so here we have the Pioneer Woman. Usually whenever you see monuments to women, it's always motherhood that is being portrayed. And all of the sacrifices that women make for family. And so that took me to a lot of the Confederate monuments that were being removed at the time and are continuing to be removed. This is the removed monument of Jefferson Davis in New Orleans. I actually used to live about 5 blocks away from here. I used to pass by it all the time. And, you know, it's right at a bus stop. It's right by a park where children play. And it's in a neighborhood that is predominantly Black. And so, you know, when people start talking about the removal of monuments and history and all of this, you know, like we're removing history. And I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about this. What is the history that's being removed? And what is the true history of these monuments? And so that's where my interest really started to become focused. And so I started to focus on these removed monuments and pulling in archival information about when it was created, whose money was used to create it, events that happened around the time or at the ribbon cutting or the celebration. And so giving the historical information, the true historical information about the monuments, which is that, 95% of the Confederate monuments were commissioned by the Daughters of the American Confederacy, the DAC. And the DAC was a group of women who helped to create the Lost Cause narrative. Them and the Robert E. Lee Memorial Association, which is still in existence. And, Robert E. Lee was asked to help out with when they were starting to create monuments. And so when they were starting to create the Gettysburg Memorial Park and starting to build and make plans for the Gettysburg battlefield and how it would be transformed into a national park, they invited Robert E. Lee to help them. And he wrote back to them and said, "I'm not coming, please don't do this." I don't have the exact quote with me, but you can find it on my website. And he said, we should be like other countries, and we should look towards healing our wounds rather than perpetuating them. And so please do not build these monuments. Do not build a monument to me. And then, of course, there's more monuments to Robert E. Lee than there are to our founding fathers or anybody else, really. There's more Robert E. Lee monuments than there are, Abraham Lincoln monuments. So I started photographing these. And this is Lee Circle on the left-hand side, also in New Orleans. And this on the right-hand side is removed Albert Johnston at the University of Texas. And this is a year after it was removed. And they still just cut, they took the monuments off of the pedestals. In this one, they didn't even take the plaques down. They just wrapped them in plastic and just kind of left it there. So they're just kind of like falling apart and decaying, which is kind of the thing that I like about them. There's interesting conversations during this project. I had a lot of interesting conversations with historians and park rangers and people that are interested in this discussion about Confederate monuments. And there's a lot of interesting viewpoints about what do we do with these and how do we deal with this? Because the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the UDC, sorry, I think I said DAC earlier, but the UDC made these. I mean, there's still just more than 1,000 of these all over the country. Anywhere that they could find some sort of connection, they spent the money to commission a plaque or a monument to be built there so that these people, part of the Confederate generals, would be seen as heroes and that their history would read as heroic rather than the truth of what actually happened. So we have this, this use of photography as an archive. I always loved the project by Hans Hocke in New York, where he kind of outed all of the slumlords in New York City. And he went into archives and found out who owned these buildings and made a project out of it. And it was just a huge controversy at the time. And I just loved that photography and that art could be used to tell the truth in that way and to out people that were working against the greater good. I went to a school in the South, and so I was not taught how to think critically. Critical thinking was not on the books. I was taught to, very specific information, and that I was tested to spit back that information. And so there was never any kind of discussion within the classroom. And then I had this one teacher, I had that, everybody has that one magic teacher, right? And so I had this one teacher, she was my English teacher, and she was only there for a year. Now I know why. But she had us read Kurt Vonnegut, Slaughterhouse-Five, and it changed my life. She also introduced me to Maya Angelou and gave me a copy of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and that also changed my life. So I was very thankful to her for opening up my eyes in this way. And in true Allison fashion, I went directly into my history class and asked why the bombing of Dresden was not in our history book. And everybody was like, what are you talking about? And then I proceeded to tell the class what had happened. And, we had this neutral city that was bombed by the United States, and they bombed a museum and people died. It was a neutral city. And why are we always the heroes in the books? Why don't we talk about our failures as well? And I got sent to the office. But there you are, that's the way things go. A lot of these, are in very specific places. This is in Kansas, and this is a courthouse. And there was a monument right there in front of the courthouse, a Confederate monument that had originally been at a university. And in the 70s, there was a huge movement by students to remove the statue from the university grounds. It was by the library, and it's oppressive, and they should not have to walk by that. And that was their point. And so they said, oh, okay, we'll remove it. We'll take it away from the university and we'll put it in front of the courthouse. And so it stood in front of the courthouse until 2018. And then it was finally removed. And so now we have this removed spot. I really like the kind of the emptiness of it. I like looking at, like in these, I like seeing them as ruins. I like seeing them because for me, when I look at them and I see them as a ruin, it means that it's a sign of progress, and that the white supremacist Confederate lost cause narrative is, and the power of that is a dying civilization. And so I see that as being past. And so for me, that's very exciting. This is another project I did that's also about heroes, but it's a little bit different. It's not so much about history. In this project, I'm photographing prepper culture. So I started to photograph, explore, and document the world of preppers, and ideas about fear, and seeing how the hero has manifested itself in our 21st century capitalist society. So this is the late capitalist hero. And the late capitalist hero never dies. He's always prepared and he always survives. So the prepper is the ultimate hero, right? So if you're not familiar with what a bug out bag is, it comes from the from military terminology. It comes from the Korean War. And so it means, they would always have a bag with all of their gear, and it was always ready to go in case they needed to bug out really quickly. So the bug out bag it's designed to contain everything that you might possibly need for the first 72 hours of an emergency, whether that's an earthquake, civil war, hurricanes, zombie apocalypse. I met all kinds of people. What I learned through this project, I went to places like Survival Con, went to survivalist conventions, met people all over the country. I traveled the entire country so that I could hit every single region of America to see, to kind of, get a broad view of what Americans are preparing for and what they're afraid of, and what's happening here. And what I learned is that a few things, and one of them is that fear is the one thing that we all have in common. I met conservatives, liberals, Mormons, Christians, atheists, veterans. I mean, I met so many different people from all walks of life, but they all prepare, and they all prepare for disaster. And I do too. We all do. I grew up on the Gulf Coast. We were always prepared for a hurricane. I'm prepared for an earthquake in California, you know, so it's not so much about like, oh, being prepared makes you this paranoid person. It's like, but where are you on the scale of paranoia? You know, this gentleman over here on the right, Jeff, was the most paranoid person that I met during my project. He was a veteran and had incredible PTSD. It was very sad. He was a very kind man, but he was very afraid and watched too many Alex Jones videos. And so he was really afraid of that at this point, that Obama was going to come and take his guns away. And so he had, this is his bug out bag, which is designed to get him to his car, where he had about 20 weapons in his car. And he had a bug out site that off grid that he was going to bug out to. And I tried to call him a few months after I made these, and I was in a show and I couldn't get a hold of him. Everything was gone. His phone was dead. His email bounced. So I was like, okay, I think he already bugged out. But there's a lot of these. There are stores that have come into being that only sell to this. It really is this kind of like intense, like they have this from the store, they have bug out bags for cats and dogs also for $90 a piece. So for $90, you can get a bug out bag for your cat. I don't know why you would do that, but you know, it's money. And this, the tagline for the title of the project is the commodification of American fear. Because what I realize is that a lot of this is really intense. Well, sorry if I'm like a little off today. I haven't slept much this week. I don't know how you guys are doing, but I'm definitely not at the top of my game this week. But it's like this intense retail therapy, you know, like shopping makes you feel better when you've had a bad day or something. And so to alleviate fear, people are buying and buying all of these things that have to do with safety in order to feel safe. Photographing them in this flat lay, what we call flat lay composition on the white background. And so I'm riffing on that, the flat lay that you often see in editorial and in advertising, you know, of like the what's in your bag, or 10 things that you need for this summer for your beach bag, you know, and so, you know, that they use those to sell things. So I'm riffing on that. They aren't perfect. All of mine are kind of like a little bit messed up, and I like them like that because I'm not trying to be an advertisement. I'm just kind of commenting on that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about teaching. I really love Bell Hook's book, Teaching to Transgress. She's amazing, and one of her professors was Paulo Freire, and so I love this quote about the engaged voice must never be fixed and absolute, always changing, always evolving. As a teacher, one of the most important things is to never get kind of mired into your curriculum and to be open to dialogue, and nothing is ever fixed, you know. And so that can be very difficult, of like maintaining this balance of control in your classroom, but also openness, so that wonderful things can happen and that learning can happen, and that the students can be involved in their own self-discovery of things. And that's what my teaching philosophy is not to teach people, but to help people discover and learn on their own. One of my favorite tools in teaching is VTS, which is visual thinking strategies. And in visual thinking strategies, you can you're looking at a photograph, you're looking at a work of art, and you're just asking these 3 questions. And it's a classroom discussion. It's a great brain activity, and you can get training. MoCA downtown offers a wonderful program for teachers, and you can get trained in VTS, and then you also get a couple of free field trips for your students to the museum. So that is really amazing. So I highly suggest that. So in VTS, you just put up a picture and you ask these 3 questions just kind of over and over again. And so what's going on in this picture? What makes you say that? And what else can we find? And so in VTS, the students are leading the discussion. You're just acting as kind of mediator. And what you're doing, you just, everything that the student says, you just paraphrase, and you just kind of go back and point at what they're observing, make connections between the students' observations, but you're mediating their conversation and they're leading it. And why is this really important? Because it establishes trust in your classroom. When there are no wrong answers and student voices lead, it creates trust. It creates an environment where they feel heard and they feel like their opinions are valid, and it's a safe space for them to you know, talk about all kinds of things, you know, because it's a great way to introduce new ideas and to show them a diversity of artists, and that is going to strengthen all of your class discussions and your critiques. That learning will, once you establish that kind of space for your students and they feel safe and empowered, then they will really, really go deep into just all class discussions and critiques. So I'm going to show you just a few of my favorite VTS images that I use. This is by Carrie Mae Weems, entitled Woman and Daughter with Children. And I used this one, this was one of my opening up ones this year, because I loved the idea of the kitchen table. And in our COVID world where the kitchen table has become so many things, it's such a great collective experience that all of the students can identify with, and they have something to say. It also, I used it to introduce shutter speed in my photography class and talking about motion. And so this became a really wonderful picture that they had a lot to say about and they really enjoyed talking about. This is Mujer Angel by Graciela Iturbide. And this is another one of my favorite ones because this image is just so striking. And it's so interesting, and the students are really, I love to ask them the question of like, what do you think is playing on that boombox? Is there music coming out of it? What's going on here? And a lot of times I use prompts like there's like VTS, when they teach you VTS, they teach it to you to do it in a very specific way where it's very, very open, and it is what it is, and it's a class discussion, and it doesn't go any further into concepts. But I like to connect it to concepts, and I also like to have students write before we talk. So I usually go through the questions, and you can see here on the right one of my students' work in their sketchbook. So this would be done as a sketchbook assignment at the beginning of a unit, and so I ask questions, and then they write. And then when we have the class discussion, one of my favorite tricks is that I never ask a high school student, what are you thinking? What do you think? Because that freaks them out. If you want to get a class of teenagers to shut their mouths, you just ask them what they're thinking. They don't want to tell you what they're thinking. So what I do is I have them write things down, and then I can ask, hey, Mary, what did you write down for that question? And then they're like, oh, and then they just read what they wrote down. So it's this way of getting in their brain and getting them to talk about the things that what they think, but without that pressure, because teenagers don't deal well with that. This is Last Thanks by Wendy Red Star. She's one of my favorite artists. I really love her. So this is a really great one. It's I use this to talk about cultural identity and appropriation. And the students love to talk about this too. And then I would start to get into a really deep conversation about appropriation. This is a project by John Henry called Stranger Fruit. And so this is a really interesting one as well. For this project, I asked them, what is happening in this photograph? Why is it happening? What visual evidence supports your interpretation? And what do you think is the meaning behind the titles of the photo and the project? As we talked about how it's untitled, so there's no name for the image, but there's a name for the project. And then I show them how it was presented in public on display. It's also been displayed in museums and galleries. He just won a big award, the Albert Newman Award for Portraiture. Such a beautiful project, really strong. And we get to talk about the Pieta again. I get to introduce them to Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit. And so it's a really exciting opportunity. There's so many different things that you can do, you know, to bring into the conversation. And then this is the last one I'm going to show you. This is by Shinpei Takeda, who is Japanese. And so this is a photogram that's made from Earth that has been, that's radioactive. This is Earth that was pulled from an area following the Fukushima disaster. And so what you're seeing is radiation. No Light has seen this image. He sprinkles the earth on top of the paper, of the light sensitive paper. He puts it in a box and then he leaves it for about a month. And then he throws the dirt away properly, I'm sure, and then processes the image. And so the image that we get, and students are always like, it's a galaxy, it's this, it's that. There's so much that they can, like, it's glitter, it's all these beautiful, wonderful things. And then they find out that it's this visual representation or this actual visual documentation of radiation and of disaster. And so that becomes a really interesting conversation as well. So like Mariana said, I'm one of the founding members of the Association of Hysteric Curators, and here we are, a big group of us. And so when you are teaching and when you are an artist and you're a teaching artist, it's important to have community. Community is so important, and it's so important to have a community of other teaching artists or artists in general to, you know, to talk to commiserate with, and to work with, and to have this kind of force of community that's outside of your work. You know, when you leave college as an artist, you know, a lot of times you leave your studio behind, you leave critique behind, and so it's finding a group or finding a way of working with others and creating community is super important. This is us. This is, we've been around for about 5 years now. This was our very first project and show where we worked with the Downtown Women's Center and the Downtown Arts Center. And we put together a show called Female Power and did these workshops with these women and made a wonderful zine. You can see the images here that ended up becoming our zine that we made. And that was really fun to do. And then the next year we did a project. We did at Angels Gate Cultural Center down in San Pedro. And so this project was made for that, but then it kind of took on a life of its own. So this is Resurrecting Matilda, where we did photographs of famous women who have been kind of left out of history. And then here we are protesting the Carl Andre show in 2017. And this is the last thing that we did right before COVID started. And this was at our opening of the exhibition, What She Said. And so a couple of artists here performing. All right, so that is what I have to share with you guys today. Thank you so much for having me today. Mariana, you said that there's some questions.
Yes, can you stop share so we can
Yeah.
take your beautiful face? Thank you. It's so great that you ended on what she said, because Maya Macrandalal is coming. She's our next speaker. She's going to be
Oh,
this
great.
right before we go on fall break. So she'll be exciting for everybody to see her performing, because that performance piece was just stunning. It was really interesting. I hope she talks about it too. You brought up so many interesting topics that are pertinent to things that we've been discussing in the class. But I'm going to just start reading the questions from the students before I do a free flow with questions between you and me. Some of them are focused on education, and then some of them are focused on the content in your work. Let's see. Has your art ever been met with conflict? And then it's kind of a two-part question. This is from Keely. So have you ever had people protest your work or be upset with it or angry with you about it?
Oh, yeah. I have family members that won't speak to me on that end. But yeah, I mean, a lot of times, you know, when you're a white woman from the South making work about white supremacy and issues like that, people don't quite understand where you're coming from, and they worry. And, you know, I mean, how do white Southerners talk about white atrocity? How do you do that? You know, and so for me as an artist, that's what I struggle with also. I struggle with that language, and but we all white people are struggling with that language. And so let's see, I've had it, you know, it's interesting who gets upset and who doesn't. But for the Bug Out Bag project, I had a lot of preppers. I got a lot of hate mail from preppers because they thought that you know, that I was misrepresenting them, and we're not fearful. We don't have fear. We're fine. You know, you need our help and this and that. And so I got a lot of hate mail from that. But a lot of and then a lot of Southerners are mad at me because of the monument project that I did. I think a lot of people just didn't quite understand the American anthem project that I was doing and the way that I was using the comparison with history. So it's been, you know, it comes from all different angles, but that's, you know, when you poke the bear's going to scream.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, because we've been friends for a long time, and so I've watched your work evolve and move up in terms of institutional placement. Like, you know, you're in a show at the Griffin Museum for Photography right now, and I'm always impressed that curators respond so much to your work because it makes people so nervous, and that's almost seems to be something that curators are really looking for, is to get people to think and question their assumptions about things. And your work is so deeply rooted in your teaching. And in your observations as a teacher and the power of a teacher, especially I remember when you were shooting the reenactors, you were looking at high school history textbooks all the time and showing me, look at this one, this one's in all of them, you know, and you were like, I've got to shoot this one. And it was really interesting for me as an artist watching you, because I had not thought about making work that way, actually turning the lens on what I was doing professionally and thinking about it as some sort of lens that all my students were looking through, and that I as an artist was responsible for thinking about. It's very inspiring. Well, this is a question about teaching, and this is from Kelly Dow. What has been your biggest challenge teaching art in general, teaching since COVID?
Oh gosh, there's so many challenges. It's with every, you know, it's, I think one of the things that's really been hard is pacing of lessons. You really have to, doing in distance learning, you really have to break things down. Scaffolding is so important. I mean, scaffolding is huge in teaching. And so, you know, good teachers can kind of break things down and scaffold. And so when you're teaching in distance learning, you have to break things down that much more, because you're not you're not present with them. So that's a lot different. And then the other thing is engagement, doing Zoom teaching. A lot of students we have a lot of equity issues. A lot of kids are, their Wi-Fi is not working. And so I'm teaching to a lot of black boxes, and my fear is that some kid is going to, you always have this fear that some kid of yours that's in your class is going to fall through the cracks. And COVID just opened up the whole goddamn floor, so like everybody can fall through so easily. And so that's one of the things that I'm the most fearful of.
Yeah, it's hard to describe to people who aren't teachers how much it keeps you up at night if you haven't seen somebody in a while. And so apologies to all my students, because I do kind of bombard them with texts and reminders, because I do, we do. I think that's one thing that isn't, and no one's talked about in this series, but is true. The people who, that good teachers do sort of worry about maintaining those relationships with their students, because for many people, and I'm sure this was your experience, you talked about your high school teacher, it's a lifeline. I know for me as a kid, it was a lifeline. My teachers were wonderful people that sort of saved me from the depths of depression. I'm glad that you talked about that, because that's something you can't really teach, but it's an instinct that people have. But it absolutely is so important right now. Let's see, what kind of images, this is from Roland Castaneda, what kind of images would you recommend for VTS? How do you select images for VTS?
Ooh, that's a wonderful question. You know, anything that, any image where you're looking at it and you're like, what's going on here? Any narrative work, I think narrative work works better, so that there's like anything that students can kind of grab a hold of and build stories around. Abstractions harder unless there's like backstory, like the Takeda radioactive work. So, things that have interesting aspects to them, things that, it's very much also about kind of hitting the students' experience. This is not really, VTS isn't the time to teach the canon. It's the time to try and reach students and to encourage them to analyze things that they don't understand, or that they might understand, or that they might be able to bring a story to.
Could you talk a little bit about how you scaffold VTS? Because I know that VTS works really well with elementary school kids, and they often will just talk and talk and talk. You have no problems, like fourth graders will talk during VTS. As kids get older and more self-conscious, they stop talking. How do you scaffold it to get people engaged?
That's when I do the writing, when I have them write first. And I do that with critique as well. I mean, that is like a huge part of scaffolding, I think, with teenagers and probably even junior high, is to have them do pre-write, have them, I was a super shy student. So anytime that I would get called on, I would immediately just, and I blush. I'm a blusher also. So then it was like this awful, it was obvious. I couldn't hide what I was going through. And so as a teacher, I'm always like trying to make sure that I'm aware of that student, and making sure that they have an opportunity to have their voices heard. And so by having them do pre-write, and then asking them what they wrote instead of what they think, is a really great way to kind of start that scaffolding. And then, by the end of the year, and some classes too, sometimes you have classes that don't want to pre-write. They just want to talk. They're super talkative and they'll just go for it. I'm like, okay, they're not going to write. That's cool. We're just going to go with it and just kind of go with their rhythm. Don't try and force a rhythm onto them. You've got to kind of get in tune with the rhythm of the class and work with them.
This is a really interesting question from Jocelyn Monge. How do you help students if they're feeling overwhelmed and like they can't produce artwork that they're happy with right now?
Yeah, I'm having a lot of students go through that. I'm going through it too. I went through several months where I just didn't make anything. A lot of my work is like I'm traveling. So it's like those projects were shut down and I was just kind of like, oh, what do I do? And they're feeling it too. And so, one of my students has been having a hard time, and she's suffering from depression. Her grandfather just died of COVID. She's like, I don't know what to do for this project. Like, they don't have, they're having a hard time, and I'm sure that you guys are too. I'm having it too, of having this hard time of like being able to get to that deep space where you really feel good and active in your art making, and you're deep into it, and coming up with ideas and things like that. Brainstorming's not really even working. And so for her, I just said, you know what? Just turn on some music that makes you feel good. Get out your phone camera and just start taking pictures of things in your room that are meaningful to you. And just kind of like, don't think about it so much. To just, for the pleasure of looking and the pleasure of listening to music and the pleasure of the objects that you love, and just kind of start there and just make something.
That's such good life advice too, because I think that our, the one thing that's difficult about the time we live in, this digitally mediated age, is that we don't often look up and look out and look around ourselves. And so we don't have the experience of deep looking, and those two things, deep looking and feeling good, are connected. Listening to music, those are all things that are connected to us. So the idea of asking her to do that, even though the directions are very simple, the effect can be very profound. I'm sure that was very moving for her to do. If you almost need permission from your teacher to do things like that. And I think that as we're learning to do this, learning to teach this way, it's like figuring out what are the deep, meaningful things that you can say to help people have that experience. They're different than we would say in the classroom, and figuring out what that is, it's in some ways, this is the most exciting year to be a teacher, and it's the most dreadful year. It's both. It's like your first year in a way.
Oh, it's totally like being a first year teacher again. Absolutely.
I know I've broken down a few times in front of the class going, I don't know, I don't know if I did this right. I'm just trying, because it's hard. And I think that if you're, the more defensive you are, the more the defensive the students get too.
Sure. You have to be able to admit when you make a mistake. Never be that teacher that feels like they have to know the answer to every question, because you're missing out on a wonderful opportunity. In my art history classes, I love it when they ask me a question I don't know. I get super excited because I love the process of research and finding the answer. And so then when that happens and I don't have the answer, we can go and find the answer together right then and there. And then we can talk about, oh, well, what's your source? And then we can talk about sources, and we can talk about it opens up so many different other learning opportunities. And then they see you're modeling that for them. You're modeling the fact that, because they know if you don't know what you're talking about and you say some bullshit, they know. I mean, they can see it, because you're like, it's because, they know, they know.
I know, and that's what's so wonderful and so awful about teenagers at the same time. They really have this high level of BS detector. They really do.
Yeah.
But, in terms of being relaxed about ambiguity, the idea that you're able to do that you're able to model that's such an important aspect or component to the creative process that is difficult to teach, but it can only be taught with. It's almost like that quote that you chose, or it's very much a discussion about that. Like, you have to be moving into that awkward space together. There is no one person teaching the other. It's a common navigation or a common research that you're all getting to do together at the same time. But it's so different than the way that a traditional teacher teaches, where it's very standards directed. And I know from working with you that you often butt heads a little bit with teachers who are more hierarchical in their teaching. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that, because it really is a difference in philosophy. And I think that somebody, and I don't know where it is, I'll find the question, is well stated, which was a question about what your teaching philosophy is, and how does that, is it related to the way that you make art and how you feel about the world? Can you talk a little bit about?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think it definitely. Your teaching philosophy is so tied into your life philosophy, and just the way that you move in the world, or the way that you create artwork. And like I said, some of my projects, all of my projects, when I start them, I have no idea what I'm doing. You know, like, oh, we're going to go down this rabbit hole. What will we find? You know, what will we learn from this? You know, and you don't know in the beginning. It's always that process. Because for me, I love research and I love that process of discovery, and that's what I want to share with my students. And if it's hierarchical, then that doesn't really exist. You know, and so. Yeah, that's the way that I am. It's the way that I approach life and work, and it's messy, and that's the fun of it, and that's where the learning occurs.
Yes, that question was from April Robledo. So thank you, April, for that.
Thank
I
you.
paraphrased it a little bit differently. I feel very honored and privileged to have worked with you for such a long time. We were teachers that taught next to each other for most of the 20 years that you were there. I left about 4 years ago. So one of the things that always struck me about your classroom was that it was a quiet and thoughtful classroom. And my classroom was always loud and chaotic and kids moving around. And so your classroom, I'd walk in and the students were just looking up and talking, and you'd have, there were all these different ways for quiet students to engage that were things that I never thought about because I was a naturally more extroverted person. I remember your first year, you were nervous about getting them all in on your team. And I do remember one conversation we had, and the only thing I remember that we talked about was teaching to your strength. And so having said that, what do you feel are, because you are a more shy introverted person, what are your strengths in the classroom or what are things that introverts can bring to the classroom that maybe extroverts don't know about or have a difficulty with?
Oh my gosh, I have no idea.
I've always envied that. Your classroom is like Zen. It's so calm and wonderful, and the kids make really good work and they're thoughtful. And I was always like, how, I don't understand. It was always very different than the vibe. And then the kind of kid you attracted was very different than the kind of kid that I attracted too. It was like and then we would swap kids. They'd send them back and forth between the two, which is always very interesting.
Yeah, that was really fun. I loved it when we did that. But yeah, I mean, you develop your the kind of kids that kind of come to you, they attach to you because they recognize something of themselves in you, or they want that energy, or they need that energy, or they need that, they find you, they find your classroom, and it's the right place for them to be. And sometimes, we've talked about this, and our other colleagues as well, where we have a wonderful kid. It's like, oh my God, I've got this kid who's just amazing and I love her, but she should really be in your class. So I'm going to tell her she should definitely take Miss Pomonis's class, and then she does. And then she's there for the next 3 years, because she's found her home. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the benefit of working in a faculty or with a team. And that's one thing that I think elementary school teachers do better than upper division or secondary school teachers, is that they always work in teams together. And so they have those conversations about what works with certain students and student behaviors, and they adjust their curriculum and they help each other. In high school and in college, we're so isolated that we don't share as much, which is unfortunate. We were very lucky because we clicked right away and started sharing right away and it really, I think it strengthened both of our classrooms, because I would come in and see something and copy it, and you'd come in, we exchanged very freely with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So we made each other better teachers. That's why it's so important to have that your community, of teachers and artists that are that you can collaborate with, and that you can work with, and that you can just vent to. How many times do we just vent to each other when we've had a bad day? And who else can understand what a bad day in the classroom is like than another teacher? Nobody else is going to understand that. They might listen and be empathetic, but they're not going to be able to understand and offer solutions like when two teachers get together.
And yeah, we do share stories a lot, don't we? And I think, this is a good question actually to end on, because it's very positive. This is from Edith Lagunas. Do you have any advice for aspiring artists? And then I would say, also add to that, do you have any advice for aspiring teachers?
Let's see. Well, I think my advice is just, to, if you want to be an artist and you want to be a teacher, or you know that you're an artist, you know that you're a teacher, that's just who you are. And to just keep going, and to never, there's a lot of second guessing. There's a lot of, you get up in front of the classroom for the first time, you have imposter syndrome, you have lots of the negative voice in your head telling you you've done a bad job. For the first year, all I did was drink wine and cry every afternoon, because I was afraid that I'd done something terrible or said something wrong or incorrect. And I was constantly checking myself and worrying so much. And, and that's part of it. And forgive yourself, allow for that to go through that. Because you have hard times, you have hard days, you have hard years, but then you have amazing days and you have amazing years, and it makes it all worth it. And you know why you're there. So if you know why you're there, you know that you belong there, then there's really nothing that can stop you. And don't let it stop you. You just, tell it to fuck off and keep going.
That's a good thing to end on. Fuck off and keep going.
That's my advice.
Thank you so much, Allison, for being here today. We're so grateful to you for coming, or I'm so grateful to you personally for coming, and for all that you've contributed to the community where you teach, and to, I think, women. I mean, just in general, you do so much for the people around you, and I'm just so grateful for your friendship and for you being here today. Thank you.
Thanks. You do too. So great to be here. Thank you so much, everybody.